lot of people listening to this podcast consider themselves in the middle of a spiritual awakening. And in the age of social media, information spreads so quickly and we can easily get sucked into pipelines that we didn't even know we were getting into. So the purpose of this episode is to help people see things from a different perspective and kickstart their research in order to be able to have a framework of empathy and anti-racism for the content they consume online, especially spiritual content. So today I'm talking to two lovely creators, Carla and Yasmin, who I met on TikTok, which is one of the most powerful platforms nowadays for spreading information about the world and misinformation about the world. So let's dive into their stories and how they were able to deconstruct some of the information online in order to build healthier communities and actually make positive impact in the world.
I'm Carla Marie. I was on TikTok, not anymore. My account's got banned, but I've kind of embraced that. So it's okay. But I started out on TikTok in the new age spiritual community, blew up really fast, realized that was not a community I wanted to be involved in, made a new account, did a pretty heavy deconstruction. And then I shifted more into the occult world. I'm kind of in an in-between space right now. I'm figuring out what exactly I want to do. But right now I'm going kind of back into studying disability justice activism and abolition theory. I work with horses outside of that. I also read tarot. So that's me.
I love it. Awesome.
I'm Yasmin. You can find me at Divinely Yaz on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. I do spirituality content, specifically more so towards African traditional spirituality, but I just talk about spirituality in general. New age spirituality, I love educating about the do's and the don'ts of spirituality to help protect people. I'm transitioning more into lifestyle content, but spirituality will always be like my home, my little niche. That's mostly what I'm known as. I do tarot readings as well and mediumship readings. On my downtime, I also do disability work because I am also disabled. And I also do a lot of advocacy for sickle cell disease because that's a disease that I have. So I do a lot of work with that under Divinely as well. So mostly people know me for my spirituality content, but also for my sickle cell disease content.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you guys know me, I'm Amina. I make mostly dream content, but the reason that I wanted to do this episode too is because when it doesn't take long on social media to realize how much stuff just spreads so quickly, and there's things that can go, wrong really quickly and spread the wrong idea and just spread fear and just mislead people to the wrong directions. For my podcast, I talk about a lot of spiritual shit. I let people I really just open up conversations to let people just talk about different things. So I think this is an important thing to just include.
Really quick, I want to thank you for, platforming the both of us and opening up this conversation because, even in your niche, which is specifically dreams, that can pipeline people into new age spirituality, further into everything else we're going to talk about. And I think in any kind of mystical spiritual space, it's really important to have that kind of education and awareness about what, you should be avoiding and how to keep your community safe, like Yas said. So thank you so much for opening up this long form discussion, which is really, really necessary. I know that doing this on TikTok it was one of the most frustrating things ever because you only have 15 seconds to, 3 minutes to get your point across.
Why don't we start talking about what the problem is?
In short, the problem is white supremacy, period. And that just infects literally every single community.
I really feel like the interesting thing when you look at white supremacy within spirituality is it affects different communities overall in the same way, but there's little niche things that are really different. So it's really hard to break that down in the umbrella of spirituality. But just in general, white supremacy is just the mentality that white is on top is better. That's what you should strive to be. It's highlighting everything under a Eurocentric lens that can look like physical things, which I know we'll get into that when we get into the whole starseeds conversation. Mm-hmm. But it can also talk about mentality, culture. It's just trying to fit blocks that aren't meant to fit, puzzle pieces that aren't meant to fit into one thing. And it's just kind of just a mentality that's kind of put into everybody's heads within the society that you have to strive to fit. Even though you're a square or a rectangle, you need to fit in this triangle.
Right. when we look at how race was invented, whiteness is not a real thing, right? But it comes up in every single conversation in every single community. And that is the mold that everybody is forced to fit into, which is kind of what Yaz was saying. We live in the imperialist core, right? The United States, same thing with France, Italy, Europe, like Yaz was saying, Eurocentrism. So it's essentially the white man is the ideal, right? So patriarchy, anti-LGBTQ, anti-transness, all of that is essentially like the very, very basics of what is white supremacy, right?
You'd think that it's easy to spot out, but then the problem becomes when it like starts to seep in little ways that people don't even realize, like you were saying, into like new age spirituality. Like so many people don't even realize when they latch onto these things of like, oh, I'm a star seed. What does that mean? Like, oh, I'm going to go into the 5D earth and I'm going to be higher vibrational or whatever. Like, you know, and then the problem becomes like, what is the truth in these things? And then what's misleading?
I mean, we all met on TikTok, right? And I think TikTok is such a key like aspect to this conversation because of how quickly everything spreads on TikTok and how people are not willing to leave the app. And the app is made for you to stay there, right? Mm-hmm. And so people just they're not even aware of where these things come from. They don't even know that New Age spirituality is just totally based on theosophy. I have not heard more than, I think, Yasmin and a couple other people talk about theosophy on TikTok and that, hey, this is what New Age spirituality is and what does that mean? Where does that come from, right? People have been trained by this app to stay in the app. And I think that's like one of the major elements to how New Age spirituality has spread so widely and has infected literally every single community, because the isolated spiritual community is not the only community where New Age ideas exist. You have even the EDM community kind of intersects with the spiritual pipeline. You have the like holistic health community, so many different communities that all kind of intersect with one another and that New Age has influenced.
Yeah, I definitely have a very love-hate relationship with TikTok. I mean, I love the people that I've met on there. I love being able to educate people because I like to look at my page as like one big library full of information where if you come on my page, you know you're going to learn something. And I want to be able to give you resources so you don't have to depend on me or anybody else, but you can go on my page and access resources and like just go from there and learning at your own pace. But it's so frustrating on the app. It's obvious that they're trying to keep certain things under wrap. I can't really make content telling someone to go look at this book or go do this or go do that. It's going to be suppressed. Mm-hmm. They don't want people going to educate themselves off of that app. If I make a video saying, oh, well, yes, stay on here on TikTok and then come back this week or next week and I'll make another video. No, like it's almost like they're even training the creators. Like I can't do anything else. If it's not related to TikTok, right. It's going to get suppressed. No one's going to see it. And not even just that, but it's seeping into people's brains, just the brainwashing of it all, that even if that wasn't the case, it's making people, I don't want to say like people's attention spans are really lowering a lot. It happens to me too, where I'm a bit lazier when it comes to doing my own independent research, where I'm like, let me just go on TikTok and like type this in the search bar and like, but it's training people to be that way, where even if they aren't physically suppressing videos where I'm telling people to go check out this website or this book, people are just doing that on their own now, where they're like, can you just make a video, like demanding, can you make a video? I don't feel like reading this book. I don't want to do this. Or even if that's wrong information, I don't feel like learning the true right thing unless you give it to me for free and make it into a video format where I can watch in 15 seconds. Yes. I don't want to hear it.
First of all, I totally agree with you. And I've been saying for so long that I have a love-hate relationship with that app, because I've met you, I've met Amina, I've met the love of my life, I've met all my best friends. But going back to kind of what you said about that, like easy to digest, fast pace, like just get spoon feed information, I think that really speaks to really the state of society. And when you look at conditions that fascism thrives in and that fascism rises in, it's exactly that. Fascism and right-wing ideology is really easy to digest. People are inherently bad. People do crime because of this. This race is this stereotype. This race is this stereotype, right? It's that really easy to digest. fascism and white supremacy thrive in communities that are not educated, right? So when you look at how TikTok is perpetuating this culture of easy to digest content, right? I think that really speaks to, again, the state of the world that we're in. I mean, we're seeing fascist leaders taking over in the United States. Italy just had a fascist leader take over, right? And so I think that kind of just like is I don't know if the word is microcosm. I think TikTok is like a microcosm of the macro, the micro of the macro. And you can kind of, it's really a reflection of the world that we are creating and co-creating.
Yeah, it really is. And it's really important. Like, people have to want to do their own research and leave that little bubble and find things out for themselves. And that takes like a level of like, wanting to have discernment for like the content to digest. And a lot of people don't have that or don't realize why it's important to have that.
I wanted to kind of speak on the discernment aspect because I feel like that comes up a lot in the spiritual community. And when people like Yasmin and I are trying to educate people on the dangers of New Age spirituality, I don't know if this has come up for you at all, Yasmin, but anytime I see a lot of other creators who talk about New Age spirituality and the dangers of it, we get told a lot that people just need to develop better discernment. And I think it would be a really good idea if we actually did talk about what that means, because I feel like that is a very vague pointer, I guess. And that doesn't really give, just telling people to learn discernment and saying that people don't have discernment. There's nothing material that people can take away from that and actually apply to, scrolling on their For You page. And should I be watching this content? Should I be consuming this? Should I be promoting this, or should I not?
No, I definitely agree. It's interesting that you bring that up because I was talking to some other spiritual creators a few days ago because just a lot has been going on TikTok in the spiritual community, like always. We're noticing that a lot of people see someone saying one thing and they're like, that sounds right, so I'm going to keep repeating it. So I'm seeing a lot of people saying, oh, just build up better discernment, just do discernment. I don't think they actually know what discernment is at all. They know that's right. They know it sounds right. So they repeat it to their audience and they repeat it to other people, but they don't know what discernment is. So they don't know how to break it down. They're just looking for the next person to kind of just sit and break it down so they can be like, oh yeah, what that person said. I always tell people as just a guiding line, for me personally, because I am autistic and I have a very high morale. I hate feeling like I'm hurting people in big communities. So one guiding force for me is, okay, is this something that is hurting a group of people in any sort of way? If it's possibly hurting a group of people, that's probably not a good thing for me to be digesting or looking into. And 9.5 times out of 10, dare I say 10 times out of 10, when you use that as a magnifying glass to information that you're looking at and viewing, you can easily dissect, okay, this is like some propaganda for some other stuff I don't need to be delving into. This is nothing that needs to be going into my brain because it's hurting people. Now, some people, they lack empathy and they won't be able to use that tool. And it's unfortunate because I tell people all the time, I'm like, okay, well, some people are like, well, I'm just, like I said before, they will say, well, I'm lazy. I don't want to unlearn that. I don't feel like doing this. This is more exciting to me. And I'm like, well, how do you feel about all the people that you're potentially hurting by spreading this and continuing to do this? Like, does that make you feel like peaceful at night sleeping knowing that you're doing that? And they're like, I don't care. That's not fun to me.
Yeah.
So it's definitely that people need to learn what discernment is.
Yeah.
We definitely need more people talking about what discernment is more clearly and ways to make sure that you always have that filter in your brain, multiple filters, but at least one, like the one I mentioned with just empathy for me is like a huge filter for me to just dissect certain information, but make sure you have those filters built up in your brain. What is going to help you to make sure you're holding yourself accountable to dissecting information like that?
Yeah, I can speak to that as someone who went through a full public deconstruction. The thing about the term discernment is that it's not inherently a empathetic term, right?
Right.
There has to be a framework for your discernment. You could have a leftist and a right winger both using their discernment. It's just, what is the framework? Right. And so I think that really brings into the conversation anti-racism. Rather than telling people, learn your discernment, learn a framework for your discernment. And I honestly believe that if people were to really sit down and take the time out of their day to learn about anti-racism, we wouldn't be having this conversation of what is discernment and how do I use my discernment. That is going to give you a baseline framework for everything, not just the content that you consume in the spiritual community. Because you had mentioned that, people lack empathy and that they can sleep perfectly fine at night spreading certain things and not realizing that they're hurt or not caring that they're hurting people, right? Is number one, we live in a capitalist society, right, where ego-driven motives are encouraged, right? You're encouraged to center yourself in all situations. And I think that disconnect, or the culture that we live in, causes that disconnect. And also being that we're in virtual spaces where it's like, you can't even see these people face to face. All of this stuff that happens online would not happen. You wouldn't be saying that to someone's face.
Right.
You just wouldn't. Having an anti-racist framework, I mean, that again, like you won't have to, because I had like a lot of people coming to me on my account, tagging me in video. Is this creator good? Is this creator good? Is this creator good? And like Yasmin said before, I really related to her on that, was like, I want my page to be a space where you take the things that I talk about and you apply it yourself. I don't want to be your cult leader. I don't want to be your like check and balance, and I feel like that is another aspect of kind of the culture that we have created on TikTok and really everywhere else. Like I said, TikTok is a reflection, is the micro of the macro, right? And I really think that it all comes down to people, especially white people, who are just dipping their like toe in the water of anti-racism work and leftist theory, being afraid to make mistakes. You have the number one thing when you start anti-racism work, when you start building that framework for your discernment, you have to accept that you are going to make mistakes, period. And being afraid of making mistakes is actually going to do much more harm than good. And that's one thing. If that's one thing that like I can pass on, it's that you're going to make mistakes. And that is where the real accountability comes in. Be prepared to make mistakes and be prepared to own up your shit.
There's this really good documentary. It's called Deconstructing Karen. They go to different cities and they host these dinners full of just white women. And they're like just challenging their beliefs. They're like, okay, do you believe that you're racist? What are your beliefs on this and that? And people get mad, they're crying. It's really raw. And so it's so raw that it was supposed to be on Netflix. Netflix does not want that documentary on their platform. It is very intense, but it's needed. So I really want people to watch it, but it's just the perfect example of people don't realize how layered racism is. I think a lot of people believe, well, as long as I'm not calling this person a name or doing this and that I'm not racist. That is not true at all. I think nowadays, in the most recent years, we're talking more about stuff like microaggressions, but it goes even deeper than that. It's a racism, anti-Semitism. It's all very layered. You're constantly going to have to keep checking yourself, not because you're inherently a bad person, but you live in a society where all these things have been fed to you since birth, especially just, I know, towards white people specifically. I've seen this where they're kind of raised in a bubble almost, where they genuinely think certain things are true when it's not, and it's on them to break out of that bubble and to kind of reteach themselves. And even as a Black woman, there's stuff that I'm constantly still checking myself about and teaching myself. It is a tedious but needed job, and you constantly have to remind yourself that it is every day. You have to be open to wanting to learn. You can't let your ego get in the way of someone correcting you or wanting, if you want to add to the better good of society, you will put your ego aside and your pride aside. It shows that perfectly how people react, how their egos jump out and they're like, well, I'm not racist. No, that's not true. Like some lady said, my maid is Black, so I know how it feels through her eyes. And it's like, you really feel that way? But I need people to watch that, because I know it's going to put a magnifying glass to it's going to challenge people's thoughts. And that documentary is really needed for people to really be doing the work to deconstruct the racism in their mentalities that they don't know exists in their brains up here.
It's a freeing process too.
Yes.
Like that's what people don't realize. And I think that's why people are scared of it, is it's not this it is kind of terrifying at first, but it's very freeing, because not only are you unlearning hate for others, but hate for yourself. And, that's always good to unlearn that.
Yeah. It's been going around on TikTok a little bit, but even on TikTok, it's been getting suppressed. And I'm like, I'm going to find that link and put it in because everybody needs to watch that. It's super good.
So pipelines, again, just like discernment, are like, they're neutral. There can be a pipeline into the left wing, pipeline into the right wing. There can be pipelines in online spaces and pipelines in physical spaces. Like, the school to prison pipeline, that is like a physical, happens in real life. And then the like online pipelines basically is shifting your ideology from one thing to another. And essentially, if I can break down the new age spiritual to alt-right pipeline, or QAnon to alt-right pipeline, what I think from my observations and from my experience is that this is targeting liberal white people. So we can go into the term liberal. That's a political ideology that is a little bit more socially progressive, but still perpetuates capitalism. So that's what the term liberal means. This pipeline is targeting white liberals who, I saw someone, I don't know if you guys have heard of the NXIVM cult. Research the NXIVM cult, but I saw someone who was an advocate for abolishing NXIVM kind of touching on it. And it's basically a fascist cult. Someone was saying that this cult is targeting white liberals who are afraid, and that's that fear that I was referencing before, of, doing something publicly racist or publicly sexist or publicly, homophobic, anti-trans, whatever it may be, and getting shamed for that, right? So it's really targeting that, just that demographic of people. And the way that it kind of hooks you is, you're scrolling, if we're using TikTok as an example, because I think that the fastest pipeline I have ever seen is definitely the TikTok pipelines, like the content on TikTok, because that is a really just fast-paced environment. It can go from like, oh, I'm watching crystal content to, oh, manifestation. How do I manifest money or whatever? To, oh, am I a starseed? Maybe I am a starseed. To just straight QAnon, like, you are anti-vax, kind of thing. So that is pretty much how the new age spiritual to QAnon alt-right pipeline works. And I think it's, from, again, my observations, my experience, the purpose is for people who, because when you think about people having spiritual awakenings, they're questioning their reality. They're questioning the norm. They're questioning the status quo. And these are people who could join the revolution, right? Could join the left, right? In dismantling capitalism, dismantling white supremacy. But what happens is they get looped right back into the political system, into capitalism, and are encouraged to manifest money. I don't know if you guys have researched QAnon at all, but it is a huge movement, and it has snatched up a lot of liberals who are could have had the potential to become leftists and, again, join the revolution, and who are now doing an insurrection.
Yeah, I can't help but sit back and marvel at it all. I'm disgusted by it all, but I'm also kind of just like, wow, they really know how to, just the manipulation is just impeccable. Yeah. Because spirituality, just in general, people hold spirituality so close to their hearts. People seek out religion and spirituality to feel something. If they feel lonely or just going through dark times, they want to feel something. They want to feel love. They want to find community. They want to feel like they have a purpose here on earth. So when you're using that to manipulate people, I tell people all the time, and I hate saying this, but mostly people understand when I say this. I don't like meeting people that are spiritual, dating people that are spiritual, befriending people that are spiritual, not literally. Like, I have friends that are spiritual and I've dated people that are spiritual, but sometimes, at least nowadays, when I meet people like that, I know I'm going to have to sit and really unwork a lot of things within them, because they have a lot of mindsets that they don't know are rooted in racism and all that. They don't realize it. And it's like unwiring a bomb before it goes off, because you have to approach them in a tactful way where you're not offending somebody, because they hold spirituality so close to their hearts. So with the whole manipulation, they're letting these people, they're sliding down this pipeline, like their bodies just rubbed down with oil, and they're just sliding down this pipeline. And it's kind of hard to get those claws unattached from their heart space, because they're like, well, I feel so deeply, spirituality has saved me and it's done this and that. And that's cool, because that's no one's disputing that. But It's just, they don't know. It's like their vision is hazed. They can't properly dissect. And when you try to come and help them out with that, that ego starts to get like attacked. And whenever the ego gets attacked, it makes us, even if it's like the slightest issue, it makes us feel like someone's coming for our whole human existence. And then we just want to freaking lash out. And so they just start lashing out. How are you going to tell me that this is right and this is wrong, but this is what I believe in and it makes me happy and I just want to do this and that and I believe in this. So that has to be true because this seems true to me. And it's literally like unwiring a bomb. Like that's, I can have empathy for it, but it's sad and it's so draining and it's tedious work.
Yeah. That really speaks to like you said, the comfort that things like conspiracy theories, new age spirituality brings people in. I mean, we're still in a global pandemic. Billionaires are making, or corporations, are making record profits while there are hundreds of thousands of people just barely surviving day by day on the streets, and I think that comfort of cognitive dissonance is what, like Yasmin said, keeps people latched onto it and kind of makes it such a difficult process because it's like, you can have the spirituality. Like no one's saying you can't have those things. It's just how you have those things that is the problem, right? And I think, I know that we're going to move into this, but I think that Starseeds is like the best example of what Yasmin is talking about. It's shocking, the responses and how predictable the responses are when you start to deconstruct this and try to educate people on it. My personal experience with Starseeds and my, quote unquote story with that is a good example of, how people get sucked into it. It's a very common theme that I've noticed when it comes to Starseeds. So what is a starseed? Someone who believes that their soul is from another planet and that has incarnated on Earth to help the planet raise their vibration and ascend into the fifth dimension, which is supposed to be the dimension of love and light and heaven, and no bad things happen and everything is all good and we all love each other and no capitalism, whatever, right? I mentioned this to Amina earlier before Yasmin got on, that it was like a perfect storm for me. And I've noticed that other people who managed to break out of this cult, we'll just say it's a cult because it is, had the same stories or the same like theme, is that really it was a perfect storm. During the pandemic, I had like a near-death experience, and immediately after that, I was introduced super randomly through a friend to this woman who does Reiki. And this lady introduces me to this concept that I am an alien from another planet and that I'm here on a mission. This is my purpose, to bring love and light and to help the planet ascend. And at that time, like my reality, my identity was completely shattered. And this really gave me a sense of belonging. And when you look at what the traits of being a starseed are, it's all neurodivergent traits or like autistic and ADHD traits. And I didn't know that about myself at the time. Of course, now I know that about myself and I'm like, oh, that's part of the reason why I got sucked into that. But it really gave me that sense of community, that sense of purpose, that sense of belonging in one of the most uncertain times in my life.
I used to follow you during that whole time frame where you were going into the peak of your whole starseed thing that you were doing on your page. And you weren't the main person sucking me into it. I think I had already started dabbling into starseeds a little bit. And I was always a very depressed child, and I never really felt like I belonged here, and I felt like I didn't have people around me to comfort me. So then I stumbled upon law of attraction. That's how I first got into it. And then it just kind of just slowly seeped into, I was like, starseeds, that's cool. What does that mean? I've heard of people mention like indigo child before, and let me look into that. And I just start obsessively just studying. And then I never was someone that really got deeply into it. I think only because it was hard for me to find information that I felt like truly connected to me. Like when I did my whole Starseed series on TikTok, I talked about how there used to be articles around 2015, 2016, I think, where there were like little quizzes that you could take that told you physically what starseed you physically looked like. And I remember doing those quizzes and I was like, I don't look like I'm not matching up to any of these like descriptions. Little did I know it's because it's rooted in freaking racism and all that. So of course, most of the characteristics, it's going to be like Eurocentric. I'm not Eurocentric at all. So of course I wasn't going to physically look like these alien beings. But at the time I was just like, oh, dang, this doesn't make any sense to me. Like I feel connected with like the descriptions that they're giving because it's neurodivergent descriptions, but physically it just wasn't aligning. So I was hitting a wall where it wasn't allowing me to go deep into it. And then around that time, I started really just trying to deconstruct all of that. And then I started realizing that I was neurodivergent. And then I realized specifically that I was autistic. And I was just like, oh, and I remember thinking about you too before we had reconnected. I was like, that girl, Carla, I wonder if she's okay. Like, I hope she's figuring out the same stuff that I'm figuring out, because this is like sending me through a whirlwind. And I was really worried. I was like, because she was really deep into it. So I hope it's one of those things too, where when you start to realize certain stuff like that, it's a cult. You can't really go to somebody, and even though I doubt that you would have like attacked me or anything like that if I would have came to you, but
I would have been defensive for sure.
Definitely defensive, because that's something that you hold close to your heart. It brought you comfort. Those identities brought you comfort. So you really can't go to somebody. You can only really hope that eventually they'll make it out of the cult. You can't really go to them. You can't in a tactful way, like I mentioned before. It's like deconstructing a bomb. I mean, it might go off, but then you still just trying to deconstruct to see how much work that you can do to at least make the bomb just not go off. But you really just have that inner hope that people will see what you're seeing and finally just deconstruct all of that. But it's a heartbreaking situation to kind of be in. I know people right now where I'm like, they still believe in it. And I'm like, I just got to kind of sit and watch you and just hope and pray that something clicks where you're able to deconstruct all of that. But it's just a very heartbreaking position to kind of be in, to see people get sucked up in all that.
I think I think it's interesting that you brought up how, you had a barrier that prevented you from going any deeper into it. That was like a real world, like grounded you in the real world and grounded you back to yourself, back to your morals, when you realize I don't look like any of the descriptions they're talking about here. And I think that is the difference, because for so long I wondered, like, why is it that I was able to break out? Why is it that some people are able to break out and some are not? Like, some people are stuck there for years, because this movement has really been happening since like the 2000s, even before that, like the 1990s. We can get into the history later. But for me, it was like, I am very grounded in my morals and I cannot fake certain things, And what happened was, this was when the switch flipped. I had found this news article super randomly, like it was CNN or something, like a BBC, something like that the Israeli military chief, or the former Israeli military chief, announced that the state of Israel, right, the Israeli government, and Donald Trump were working with the Galactic Federation, which is who the starseeds were supposed to be like representing on Earth. And I was like, wait a second, I'm not a Trump supporter. Something's off here. And that's when I came out to my page and was like, I think I'm gonna back off of this stuff for a little while. And I didn't really explain why, because I hadn't really pieced it all together. And then that's when I realized, like, oh, this is QAnon. This is, because even my mom had mentioned to me one time when I was super in deep to all that stuff, she's like, are you a QAnoner? And I didn't even know what that was. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning of this, which is like, people don't exit the damn app. People don't get off the app. They don't know. People don't even know what QAnon is, So that was kind of when like the switch flipped for me. It was something real, something that wasn't just this energetic, mystical, magical, this might happen. We might have flying cars on Ascension Day. Just, it was something material, something real, something I could actually see. This is a verified news source, and it goes completely against my morals and completely against my politics. And that's when it happened. And I think that is really key to people, is that they need something to ground them into reality, into physical reality, not just this like virtual, mystical, astral kind of like space that isn't like tangible. Kind of snap them out of it. I think that is like very key. And that's what you kind of hope for. Like you said, is like, damn, I hope something gets to the point where they just realize this isn't who I am,
Yeah. That definitely makes sense. Just listening to you say all of that, I really feel like, and of course this is a bit nuanced, it's not black and white. I feel like when you have a sense of yourself, of who you are as a person, whether that just be physically, because for me, what helped to ground me was just me, like my physical appearance. I was like, I know who I am physically. I don't look like that. But I feel like people that really don't have you will never 100% have a true sense of who you are fully, because we're always growing and changing. And there's a lot of layers to who we are as people. But if you have at least a small smidget of who you are as a person, that will always keep you grounded in some regard. When I made that Starseed series and I posted it, I was really disappointed personally with how many Black people were coming and attacking me. I thought when I posted it, I was going to be experiencing a lot of racism from white people. It was quite the opposite. I wasn't getting attacked by white people. I was getting attacked by people that looked like me. And I was like, what the heck? This is really weird. But then when I sat down to really think about it, the history of anti-Blackness and racism and just slavery and how much brainwashing and indoctrination goes into slavery, because I think when most people think about slavery, they just think about the physical aspect of slavery, but there was a lot of mental agony when it came to slavery, and a lot of people's minds are really rewired from that. Slavery really didn't end for a lot of people into the 1970s. That's very recent. I still have family members alive that were born into slavery. Like, it's very recent. So a lot of those people, when I would try to sit down and talk to those people that were antagonizing me, it's like they didn't have it was so sad. They just don't have a true sense of who they are, and like their morals, their standards. They didn't have their own personal morals or standards or ethics, or it was like they were just a shell of a person. And I don't mean that because I know that's a term that a lot of New Agers use, like that whole, they're an NPC, they don't have a soul. I don't mean that. It's almost like they just didn't have a true sense of who they were, and they were just looking for something to attach themselves to. It's really sad. A lot of communities, like the Black community, fall very easily susceptible to propaganda like that, because there's a lot of, and I'll even say more specifically African Americans, not just Black people, the Black diaspora as a whole, but specifically African Americans, because we were taught and told that we don't have our own culture and we don't have our own identity. So we search for other identities to attach ourselves to. Oh, we're the First Natives. We're the Israelites and all that. We don't feel like we have our own culture, so we just attach to anything that sounds cool, and we just stick with it and run with it. And a lot of those people that use those manipulation tactics, they depend on that. And it's also a cycle that affects other people besides Black people, because I've had white people come to me and they're like, oh, well, I'm just going to follow Black people then, that when it comes to spiritual content, because since y'all go through so much, y'all want to be spreading like misinformation because like you're Black, so you know what it feels like to experience racism and all that. So it should be safe for me to follow Black people, right? And I'm like, no. So now you have all these people spreading this misinformation, and you have people only following those people because they're like, well, they're Black or they're this and that, so they wouldn't be spread. They should know better. And it's just this vicious cycle that just continues and continues. And I don't see a lot of people really talking about that, but that definitely, there's something needs to get in there to discontinue that.
I mean, even that was one of the reasons why I justified what I was doing, was because I was kind of also getting some of my information from like the Hotep Black Israelite community. And so I figured, well, it must be okay then if like the most oppressed class in America is, like feeding into these ideas, it must be okay. And I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying about, white people being afraid to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So back to the alien stuff, I will say this, aside from the toxic starseed narrative that's being used to manipulate vulnerable people, when it comes to aliens, there is some validity there in terms of the fact that we are not the only species in the universe. There are other beings and entities and alien races. So I guess the next question I wanted to talk about was, what do we actually know about aliens, and how can we separate that from a toxic manipulation strategy?
So I think what is really important to look at is the context of when we started seeing UFOs. Right. So there are like a few from, what we know, a few like legit, where did this thing that's flying around in the air come from? One of the first spottings, like documented spottings where we have actual footage of that, or at least what we're told is real, right, happened around like post World War II era, like right after World War II. And it was kind of when, I don't really know the specifics, but it was kind of when I think the United States and maybe Germany were having like a little bit of a standoff. And I think the missiles went out or something. And it was because of this ship, unidentified flying object that we spotted and we got on video. And what you really saw was a propaganda war and like a fight to control the narrative. So is the Galactic Federation real? I think not. I think that is just like you have to think about like, okay, around World War II, the United States and these other countries that are like facing off they don't want to look clueless to their population, because if they look clueless to their population about what the fuck is flying around in the sky, that's going to make the people fearful. That's going to make the people question the motives of the government, right? So what the government wants to do, the United States and whoever else was involved, is take control of the narrative. And I think that is really when we saw the United States especially trying to take control of the narrative, right? Oh, it's the Galactic Federation and we're actually talking to them. We're actually we're actually working out a plan with them and they're actually going to help us save the world. And so there's nothing for you guys to worry about. We totally know what that was, right? I don't know. Did you guys both see Nope?
Yeah, I saw
No.
You haven't seen Nope? Oh my God.
I keep forgetting to watch.
Oh, okay. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm just not.
Well, you can spoil. I have a bad memory. I'll forget it once you say it.
Oh no. Okay. So what I love about, I think every single New Ager needs to watch that movie, because we think that the aliens are just people in a spaceship. How do we know it's a spaceship? That's really what I think that movie really speaks to, how like limited our imaginations are as little pea brain. I mean, we're a speck of dust. Just our planet is a speck of dust. We are bacteria on a speck of dust. Yasmin, spoiler alert for anybody listening to this. The movie basically dives into how do we know what a UFO really is, right? And the UFO looks like a spaceship from underneath, but it's actually a giant predator that literally flies around the sky and sucks people up and eats them. It's not a spaceship with little green men or Commander Ashtar of the Galactic Federation, flying the spaceship. It's a predator. And that, yeah. So, and there's also horses in the movie, which is really cool as a horse person. So I think, everyone should watch it. It's really good, especially the New Agers though. Cause it's like, come on, like that's all we got is the Galactic Federation, this like advanced humanoid species. That's all we can come up, little green men. Our imaginations, our conceptualization is so limited as humans. And I think that is like a really, really good way to explore that. That movie is the perfect way to explore that idea, and kind of just like makes this whole Galactic Federation thing and all this like new age propaganda regarding aliens fun, kind of funny. I mean, it's not, because it's doing a lot of damage, but also like it's once you step out of like, okay, are we actually sure that there are just human beings flying around in a spaceship? Like it becomes so obvious that this is just human beings wanting to maintain control over other human beings and using propaganda, storytime, fairy tale to do that. And it worked.
Yeah. One thing I feel like that really fuels that is whenever people ask me what I would describe as New Age spirituality, I say that it's a whole bunch of cultural appropriation. It's a bunch of people just taking maybe 1% or maybe 5% of an aspect from specific cultural practices and just taking it and just running with it and spinning it. Because when I had put out with that Starseed series, I got a lot of people that were in my comments that were like, well, these stories existed before that term and they come from like indigenous practices and African practices. And I'm like, I know that because literally my spiritual practice is an African practice. Like I realize that, but y'all have to realize where it comes from. A lot of these people that create these star seeds and all this other stuff, they go to these cultural practices and they hear one thing. A lot of these concepts are way more complicated than people could ever fathom in a few seconds or one word. So they take it, they don't fully understand these concepts. They take what they what sounds interesting, it sounds cool. They take it, they bring it back over here. Yeah. And then they just start spinning it, adding stuff to it. And that's how you get like the blob of new age spirituality. Like it makes, once you realize that and that clicks in your head, it's easy to dissect, okay, this is just new age spirituality and this is not. If you can't 100% find historical backing to whatever you're believing in and practicing, you should probably leave it alone.
Yeah. And I think it's funny like that you say that, oh, well, it's indigenous. Well, first of all, it's like, okay, but so, oh, well, it's Hopi. Oh, well, it's Dogon. Okay, are you Hopi or Dogon though? Number one, I don't think you are. Okay, and then number two, it's like, so it's like, okay, even if it is Hopi and Dogon, I'm pretty sure those are closed tribes. I'm pretty sure like you don't have access to those things, number one. And number two, like I researched with a close friend of mine, starseeds. The first thing that we did, also my friend who introduced me to leftist theory, the first thing that we did was start with one of the like starseed channel messages that I went viral for, right? We went to that, we looked at who channeled this, right? Who made this shit up, right? What we, broke down the text, we deconstructed all the vocabulary in it. We pointed out, oh my God, like it was horrifying when it was horrifying reading it from an anti-racist and like leftist perspective. Like, holy shit, this is so obvious once you just step out of it. But we basically traced the chains of transmission. And that led into a whole year of research. We delved into theosophy. We delved into all the people that contributed to starseed theory, Rudolf Steiner, Brad Steiger, Timothy Leary, all those people, literally all just fascists. I mean, even Hitler was very, very interested in this stuff. I'm still researching it, over a year later. The point is, not a single time was there a primary source coming from an indigenous elder saying, yes, we believe that we come from aliens that are blonde-haired and blue-eyed and living in the sky, flying around in spaceships who are going to save the world and ascend us to the fifth dimension. Not a single time. And then anytime there is a source, it's like, oh, this comes from an indigenous tribe or whatever. It's a French person or a British person going to visit that tribe, listening to them tell their stories, talk about their, mythology, talk about their spiritual beliefs, and coming back and being like, it's aliens. Like, I know a lot of people reference like the indigenous stories about the Pleiades, the seven sisters, right? That's about the constellation. No one said anything about aliens. That is about the seven sisters constellation, the Anunnaki. Those are primordial forces. Those were gods, right? Mm-hmm. Those were essences. It's so funny how the New Agers will like their responses are so predictable. Like it was like the same. I would hear the same thing over and over and over, and I would be able to predict their responses. And it's like, you guys are calling us NPCs for doing research?
What sucked me into it was not so much the alien stuff, but like the manifestation, that type of stuff.
I mean, even before TikTok, like I had a mutual on there who was talking about how he's been involved in, I don't think he's on TikTok anymore. I couldn't find his account last time I looked, but he has been involved in the spiritual occult world for quite a long time, like at least over a decade. And so around like 2010, he was involved in starseed groups channeling the Galactic Federation on Google Hangouts. You know what I mean? Like it's been around for, and that like surprised me when he mentioned that to me. I was like, holy shit, this is like, there are people who have, Heaven's Gate. Have you guys researched Heaven's Gate at all? Or do you guys know what that is? When I watched, there's a documentary on Netflix about the Heaven's Gate cult. And when I watched it, I was like, holy shit, this is literally starseed. And that happened like, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
So, these ideas are all like, they're all very old, and people don't know that because most people, at least our generation, is finding out about this stuff through TikTok, and then no one thinks to leave the app, because it's just scroll to the next thing.
Yeah, I definitely was when I was doing my own personal research, I expected the information to go back to maybe the early 2000s. I was very shocked when I learned about theosophy and it was going all the way back to the 1800s. I was like, what the heck? I would have never guessed that these mindsets were that old and that prevalent. I would have not guessed how many books are around that perpetrate this narrative, because I have people coming to me also that are like, well, if it's in a book, like, okay, you're telling me not to look online. I'll just read any book. And it's like, no, you can't read just any book, which is why when I did that series, I made sure to list people and all the books that they wrote, because it's easy where you're just like, okay, I'm just going to read a spiritual book because books are more trustworthy than the internet. And then you pick up a problematic author because you didn't research the author and their mindsets and what they believe in. And now you're absorbing all that information because you're like, well, it's in a book. That's better than TikTok. And it's like, no.
Anybody can write a book.
Yeah.
Anybody at all can write a book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say, like, for anybody who's listening to this, if you're like, okay, well, I want to know more about this, because if Yaz and I were to go into the history of like very first origins of Starseed, definitely look into Helena Blavatsky, root race theory. Again, this is all starting in the 1800s. Rudolf Steiner is another, Nazi occultist and or spiritualist. Look into Timothy Leary, Brad Steiger. There's also an article that puts all of this into a very organized timeline and leads us all the way back up to the present with QAnon. It's called The Dark Historical Roots of Starseeds by Jules Evans. It goes into everything I just talked about, very concise, very well written. And again, it leads us all the way back up to the present, how we got to QAnon. And yeah, I think that's honestly the best. I don't know why I couldn't find that for like a year. I just found that article a few months ago, I think. I wish I knew about it when I was researching all this by, for my friend and I, by ourselves. That is the best resource I have found to explain starseeds in the best way possible. And it's an easy read and there's pictures, so it's not just words. As someone who went through the whole journey and the whole like deconstruction, my best advice, literally just start with what is anti-racism. Like literally, because again, if you build an anti-racist framework, because like Yasmin was saying, when we were talking about discernment, is this going to hurt anybody? That's basically what anti-racism is, right? Is preventing it's harm reduction and harm prevention, right? And it's learning how to be back into community, because capitalism, white supremacy, that teaches us to disconnect, right? That teaches us to be the person on TikTok who is going to continue spreading starseed and spreading anti-Semitic reptilian conspiracy theories, because we are so disconnected from each other and from our empathy that we're okay with doing that, right? And I really feel that anti-racism is the way to go with developing a framework for your discernment, with learning how to reconnect with your empathy, reconnect with yourself, right? Deconstruct biases that you have about yourself, and just learn how to spot, something that is going to potentially harm another person. So along with anti-racism is learning dog whistles and really learning like the characteristics of fascism and of fascist cult leaders. Like one thing that I really made sure to make my main focus of my like anti-racism work was understanding fascism and how it works. There's a really good book called The Anatomy of Fascism. Even just like Googling the characteristics of it, so you kind of understand, where fascism thrives, what the language looks like, that kind of thing. I think all of that is really important because, again, you are learning how to unlearn hate and unlearn biases for all kinds of marginalized communities, right? And I think that is just the best way to build that framework of, is this thing that I'm consuming potentially hurting someone else?
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that. I was definitely getting ready to mention dog whistles, because gonna have to see, and I'll talk to Carla because this may have to be like a joint thing that we can do. But I feel like having a list of dog whistles and buzzwords that are commonly heard would really help people, because like Carla was saying, with the star seeders and the new agers that come in our comment section, just they repeat the same stuff over and over again. It's very scary. It feels like it's just brainwashing, like how you see in those movies where everybody turns into a robot and it's just like, oh, you're an NPC. It's literally like that. The same words and phrases are used every single time. So it's not hard once you start learning a few of those buzzwords, those dog whistles that they use as buzzwords. It makes it incredibly easy to spot. Like the interesting thing, the usage of memes and stuff to really get people. A lot of things start off as a joke, and then they just it's no longer a joke. So you saw people were really using NPC as like just a common little joke, like, oh, you're an NPC, ha ha ha. And now whenever I hear NPC, I'm like, okay, are you like a new ager using the word NPC?
That's a tactic of the alt-right, is a joke, but it's not. That's actually how I feel, So learning things like that, like what is a dog whistle? What is anti-Semitism? What is white supremacy? What is the alt-right? what is propaganda? Like just the very, very basic thing. If you don't know what a word means, okay, Google it. Like you have a phone. If you're on TikTok, if you're listening to this podcast, you have access to the internet, like all this information is very accessible. What is an alt-right pipeline? There are a ton of resources. If you want to know the information, if you want to find out certain things about yourself or about the world, like you will do that, you know? And so it's really just about like, okay, I'm going to open myself up to learning and I'm going to allow myself to be learning these very basic terms and then go from there. You know, start with just what is white supremacy? What is fascism? What is a dog whistle? What is anti-racism? And see what you learn. It's that simple. And I think that it seems like a really, really daunting task because all these things seem very complicated, but all of these issues are interconnected. When you think about, oh my God, COVID is still happening. Oh my God, people are houseless. Oh my God, there's a war in Ukraine. Oh my God, there's this happening. It's all the same issue. It's all one giant web, and you are just pulling at one of those strings and starting to untangle that entire web. It all leads back to the same thing, you know? So the best framework is an anti-racist framework because you are learning how to protect the most vulnerable, which then protects everybody else and helps you build community with everybody else. To answer what is end stage capitalism, what is colonialism? I mean, we all learned Christopher Columbus, 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? Which really meant Christopher Columbus and all of his buddies came to the Americas and completely, wiped out indigenous populations. And we had chattel slavery, right? Essentially, colonialism is capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy. So which is what we were talking about at the beginning. The ideal is the white man. And it's what we are the system that we are living under currently. Capitalism is a system in which profit is placed over human life. So you see that in even the most basic things, like we have to pay for food and water and shelter, which when you think about it is ridiculous because we are living on a floating rock, right? And so end stage capitalism is a cycle, right? I mean, when you think about it, capitalism is all about endless production and endless consumption. We live on one planet, right? So when you endlessly produce and endlessly consume, you're either going to run out of things or you're going to overproduce, right? All of the things that we consume end up just in the ocean, on the planet, So end stage capitalism is the stage in capitalism we are in right now, which is when fascism will usually jump in and thrive, right? Things are collapsing. So that's the stage that we're in right now, basically, which is the most vulnerable for the citizens and when fascists tend to come in and take over. So earlier I mentioned how when you have a spiritual awakening, right, you're essentially questioning your reality and questioning the status quo. Why am I living on a floating rock and paying for food that goes in my mouth that I need to survive, that I will literally die? Why am I paying for that, right? When we have spiritual awakenings, those are the kinds of questions that come up. And so essentially, like anything that motivates the people, the citizens, right, or the working class to question the motives of the United States government, the United States government is then going to try to take control of that narrative. Kind of like what I was talking about with the UFO spottings around World War II, post-World War II, Cold War era. Do you guys remember those? I'm sure you remember this, Amina, because you're into like the kind of dream niche community, right? The CIA documents about astral projecting, about the gateway documents, right? The gateway documents. So a lot of people will wonder, like, why was the CIA so interested in that, right? The CIA was interested in that because it's a way for them and did that project because it was a way for them to gain control of the narrative, right? Anything that the people are interested in and that is making them question the motives of the government, we're going to jump on that. We're going to collect that data and we're going to use it to take control of the narrative to funnel people back into the political system, right? So essentially, like, going back to New Age spirituality, pipelining you into QAnon, targeting people with more liberal views who have the potential to become leftists are then snatched up by New Age spirituality, right? So I think a main takeaway is like, just for that question is like anything, not just New Age spirituality that is motivating people to ask questions about the motives of the United States government, about, international government, they are going to try to take control of, okay?
And also with a lot of New Age belief systems, and I think Carla touched on this a little bit, but it pushes people to have an individualistic mentality where they are only like worried about themselves, and they kind of put themselves on this pedestal. They're only worried about themselves, and I'm gonna go hang out with the aliens. I'm just gonna go home and hang out with the aliens. Like that's all I care about. That's what I strive to do. But as humans, we need community, and we're so vulnerable because of a lot of these mindsets where it's taking away the fact that if we had community and if we looked out for one another, a lot of these, we wouldn't have a lot of the issues that we have now. There's a lot of walls built up where we could easily just, why are the walls built up? Like, a perfect example of this that pops into my head. I'm not too fond of the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party has done a lot of bad things, but some people may be familiar with Fred Hampton, and I believe they did a movie on him, but I recommend watching it because it will reveal a lot to you. But basically him and a couple of other people that were part of the Black Panther Party, they realized, hey, we're fighting for Black rights, but let's rally in people that also have the same issues as us. So that means like the poor white people or just other groups, Asian people. Everybody started realizing, like, letting go of their differences and being like, why are we hating one another and doing this and that when we all have the same issues, where we could all be putting like our resources and helping one another out with skills that we have. Like, I know how to do this, you know how to do that. We can help each other out. We can leave the middleman out and like doing this weird thing. Like, we can build community and really make big changes happen. And when they started to do that, a lot of things started to change, and a lot of just issues that we see that are prevalent in society started to kind of melt away. And of course, I believe he was murdered shortly after, or something like that happened. Yeah, just community is big. When you start to, like Carla was saying, when you start to build up that anti-racism framework in your mentality, it also opens your heart up more to be able to connect to more people that don't look like you. And that's really important because we all have our own individual customs and cultures and all that. So that means we all have different skills that we could all use to help better one another and better the community. And again, that would just solve so many. It's not as black and white as I'm making it sound, and that it's not as easy, but it would overall solve a lot of issues if people learn to like let go of some of those mentalities and just come together and like, okay, let me help you out, because really we all have the same issues and people are struggling to kind of.
The last thing the ruling class wants is a united working class.
Mm-hmm.
And this relates back to what I was mentioning before you hopped on to Amina, that I was reading. What is it called? It's called Emergent Strategy by Adrian Brown. There's a free PDF of it online somewhere. These things take time. Change takes time. Building community takes time. Butterfly effect is a real thing, and we can plant seeds. Even just like, if there's one thing that everyone can start with, it's something as simple as getting to know your neighbors. Do you guys know, like, for the people listening, like, do you know your neighbors' names? Have you ever, spoken to them? Do you know what they do for work? Like that kind of thing. But someone was talking about how it would be really smart for communities. Like, let's say I live in a little cul-de-sac. Let's say all of us got to the point where we all knew each other's names and we all decided, you know what? Why don't we all pitch in for one lawnmower instead of us all buying one lawnmower, and we can just share this community lawnmower, right? That would make our community less dependent on capitalism, right? Because we're not all spending, how much is a lawnmower? I don't know, hundreds of dollars?
Like 200, I think.
For about a lawnmower, horrible example. But instead of us spending, all this money on our own lawnmowers, why don't we just share a lawnmower, And then we can take it to, oh my God, why don't we take our fences down and make our backyards just one big community hangout where we can, oh, can I use your grill? Oh, sick. Do you have butter or whatever? It's as simple as that. Building community and getting to know the people in your direct vicinity. I mean, online communities are great, but like if it comes down to it and there's some sort of shortage or there's some sort of like, ecological disaster, some sort of natural disaster in your area, you know that you can rely on those people and you know that you can kind of bind together and be a unit, be in community with each other. That is, I think, one of the most important things that we should all be doing. If hey, I'm going to live in this neighborhood for a pretty long time, get to know the people around you. Host a potluck, whatever it is that you feel comfortable doing, you feel safe doing. Of course, like if you feel unsafe doing those things, like take whatever precautions necessary. But I think that is like something that is very easy that we could all do, is even just start getting to know the people around us, and kind of start implementing that like general sense of community. Again, the last thing that the ruling class wants is a united working class, because when we are all separate and disconnected, we are weak and we are controllable. And for anyone listening, just, I don't know, remember that hope is revolutionary.
Yeah, and it gets hard when like the right information, like we were saying earlier, is not pushed out and is kind of like suppressed and pushed to the side.
That's why it's really an easy trick, is like Carla was saying, learning those dog whistles and those buzzwords. When you do certain research, even if it's hard to find those really good articles, there'll be like one or two words or a phrase, the way they phrase something, where you'll like something will go off in your head and you'll be like, that sounds familiar. I'm pretty sure that's like Nazi rhetoric that I read about last week. It never fails, honestly. I think some people, whenever they hear that I do a lot of research, they think I'm just constantly reading books every single day of every single minute and researching every single day of every single minute. And sometimes I get in modes where I do that, but sometimes it's just you got to work smarter, not harder. And so I look out for those dog whistles and those buzzwords, and it cuts down my research time by a lot.
Yeah, and I think something else that people don't expect is that once you start unpacking your own biases, it just gets so much easier to spot. It's not necessarily a process that like can be explained step by step. It's more of a natural process that unfolds that you'll see once you just take that first step into that work. Once you do that very basic research and start unpacking your own shit, that's when, you'll have a whole new lens of looking at the world. It's not something that we can, okay, first you do this and then you do this, and then start with yourself, start with that very basic research, which will force you to ask questions about yourself and your own biases, which will then again open up a whole new perspective for you. And not, I unpacked that thing in myself and now I see it in this, so now I know to avoid that, right? And then the next thing, and it's just like peeling back the layers of an onion.
What are a couple, I won't go too deep into it, what are a couple of like main common dog whistles that you guys see a lot? Like I want people to like hear them.
God, there's like so many that it's like hard to...
I would say anytime like you hear the word NPC mentioned, that's definitely a red flag. Anything Starseed, Pleiadian, Galactic Federation, stay away from that. That's like, those are more like the spiritual kind of, But I mean, the alt-right, like the group followers are not, they're pretty, I would say they're pretty organized. I don't know about smart, but pretty organized. But they have literally a load of dog whistles. Numbers, phrases, acronyms. There's a really good TikTok page called Analyzing Anti-Semitism. I don't know if they've posted in a while. I haven't checked their page in a while. But they go through the different like Nazi dog whistles. And it's just like the lengths that they will go to communicate with each other on online forums is insane. Even like the Pepe meme has kind of become a dog whistle and was a tool for QAnon. Strictly, like if we're just referring to the spiritual community, I would say anything high vibe, low vibe is kind of a red flag. Anything that's focused on like reptilians, Starseed, Pleiadian, all that stuff, 5D, 3D, 5D, that's when things start to get a little iffy. Of course, not everyone who uses these terms is like a malicious person, but definitely like if you hear those terms, if you hear that kind of topic, divine feminine, divine masculine, start to kind of question like what community am I in and what are the intentions of this narrative or that I'm hearing, right? I think I think that karmic relationships, twin flames, like all of that is law of attraction. All of those things, all those subjects are just kind of in that realm of like, be careful, It's really, it's less of a pipeline and more of a trapdoor at this point.
You named all of them that I could think of. Maybe the New Earth. I don't know if you said that. New Earth.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
It's been a pretty good conversation and a lot to learn. So I'm really thankful for both of you for coming on here and helping me with this process.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you. This was awesome.